We now pick up a bit of Emma Carlson's account. So we arrived at a list of agreed upon basic needs, but there were still things we couldn't decide whether or not to include, debating where to draw the line. But clearly, a line had to be drawn in order to keep the workforce hours reasonable. Not everything that people wanted could be provided by the workforce. What one person deems as important, another may not. I remember the class coming to sort of a standstill. I then voiced a thought that many of us were sharing. I said, okay, so maybe all of these basic needs are provided for, but what about the other stuff? What about all the stuff that we want and enjoy, all the stuff that isn't going to be provided by the workforce? What about that stuff? Do we just not have that stuff anymore? I'm not sure I still like the idea of this cooperatism. And what about all the stuff that is provided for? Do we all get exactly the same thing? Would all of the houses be the same? Would all of the appliances be the same? Would all the furniture, clothing, and food be the same? Would it be one style fits all? Would there be no longer any choice and variety? I, for one, did not find that very appealing at all. I would rather stay with the system we have, despite its faults. Then Carter Osborne pointed out that just because some things were not provided for by the workforce did not mean that people couldn't have these things. It just means the workforce wouldn't automatically provide them. Then it was Jordan. He was always so against it. He sarcastically said, oh, so now we've got certain things that people can't get from the workforce. How are these things going to be made available? Wait a minute. I've got an idea. How about we start some sort of a money system so people will want to make these things because they can make a profit by selling them? There was a sort of prolonged, defeated feeling of silence. Then it was John Chandler who asked, what if one of the workforce functions was to provide the means for individuals or groups to produce these things on their own? The workforce could provide the raw and refined materials as well as the tools needed to produce these other things. Jordan replied, now we're going from a workforce providing everything to everyone having to produce their own. Does anyone else see how out of hand this is getting? John continued, maybe the workforce is only there to provide the rudimentary stuff. I remember he was sort of thinking through it and working it out as he was going. For instance, he continued, let's say I want a kite, but the workforce doesn't make kites because people don't need kites. I may want a kite, but I certainly don't need it. If I want a kite, then I'll have to make my own. However, the workforce will provide the means for me to do that. The workforce will provide wood and paper and a saw and sandpaper and glue and string and whatever else someone might need to make a kite. The materials used to make the kite are basic materials that are needed for many things and have many uses in a modern society. So kite enthusiasts would not have to go without kites in cooperatism. In fact, they can have as many kites as they want. All of the materials and tools would be free, and they can make as many different styles and shapes and colors as suits them. Each one of their kites will be unique and personal. Jordan retorted, okay, so we got kites handled. Big deal. I still like the idea of when I want a kite, I just go buy one. Julie Wyman then picked up on John's train of thought. Kite enthusiasts could get together with other kite enthusiasts and share ideas and techniques, forming groups. They'd be like clubs. Those who wanted to learn about making and flying kites could drop by one of these clubs and try their hand at it for free. And there would be plenty of veteran kite makers and flyers to help them out and give them advice. Jordan quipped, what an imagination. Tracy Morgan kept going with this. These clubs would refine their techniques and create new ones and modify their tools and materials, creating more and more intricate and stable designs. Since everyone would be involved in creating their own kites, there would probably be at least as much variety as there is now and more experimentation and creativity. Everyone started to see where this was going. Scott Moody added, and there would probably be all kinds of extra kites lying around at these places because people would keep making newer and better ones, leaving their earlier attempts for newcomers to use. John then expanded this idea of these specialty groups to include all hobbies, sports, arts, and crafts. It would apply to anything not directly provided for by the workforce. Roger Dulesky was on the baseball team and asked, "So you're saying that, for instance, anyone who wants to play baseball would have to make their own equipment, like bats, balls, bases, gloves, and stuff?" "Well, why not? Yeah, I guess so," said John. Scott picked it up from there. "Since baseball has a lot of interest, there would probably be whole organizations devoted to it. There would be places where members could go and make whatever they needed for the game." Roger asked, "Well, what if you weren't a member?" "I guess I would picture these organizations and their facilities open to the general public," answered Scott, looking around for consensus. Jordan interjected, "Oh, now all of a sudden we've got organizations and facilities. Where do the facilities come from?" "The segment of the workforce that handles construction," replied John, shrugging his shoulders. "Why not? People could form their own teams and leagues, but the facilities would always be open to the public, so anyone could go and outfit themselves, join a league, and play some baseball. I guess that's kind of how I would see it. The workforce supplies the tools and the materials, and that would be the same for all the sports and arts as well." "So I guess we're saying," proposed Ray Gunther, "that anything that is considered more of a pastime or entertainment would have its equipment provided by the people participating in those pastimes." We all had to think about that a minute and then tentatively shrug our shoulders and nod our agreement. Ken Hasselman then asked, "So you wouldn't just be able to go and buy a tennis racket or a hockey stick or a clarinet or a beach ball anymore? You'd have to make them?" "I'm not sure some of these things would be makeable by your average person. A clarinet, for example." John thought about it for a minute. "Well, like Julie and Tracy said, there would be clubs and organizations comprised of enthusiasts where a beginner could go for help and instruction. And like Scott said, there will be those who will be good at making these things, in this case clarinets, and enjoy making them, and go on to make many, improving their technique each time and not having much use for their earlier inferior attempts, discarding them for others to use freely. So I don't think people would go without these things unless they chose to. Remember, the materials and tools are all free. You just have to be willing to put in the time to make what you want with the support of others who are also working on the same thing. I guess that could work. I mean, clearly there would be plenty of people who would have enough of an interest in these various pastimes. That's obvious because there is now, already, in our present system." John continued, "So these clubs and organizations would be there to support each hobby or interest, and they would carry on the tradition of these things, exploring and discovering new techniques and innovations. It would be kind of like it is now, except you wouldn't need money. People willingly devote a great deal of time and effort to these things because they enjoy them. The difference is there wouldn't be stores where you could just go and buy the things you needed to get started. The organization would be, well, the stores where you would go to begin. I don't see why this wouldn't work." So I said, "Well, what about all the stuff that the workforce does make? Like furniture and refrigerators and cars, would they all be the same?" Carlton offered, "I'm thinking the workforce would have to be practical in the styles and designs. The idea would be to construct things to last. The longer they could last, the less workforce hours would be needed to keep replacing them, and therefore This would in turn keep the size of the workforce down. The smaller the workforce, the less time each individual in society would be required to work in it. Then Scott said, yeah, but based on what we're talking about with the clubs and organizations, I imagine that individuals, if they wanted, could be involved in making, say, their own furniture or cars or refrigerators as well. I mean, why not, right? Think about it. Maybe my hobby is cars or building furniture. Maybe I enjoy it. Almost anything you can think of, there are groups of people out there that do it for enjoyment right now. If I'm into cars, then maybe I'd want to make my own. After all, the workforce provides the materials and the tools, right? So everyone would be free to personalize anything they want. Some people maybe don't want to make their own furniture or car, so the workforce could produce some generic, top quality furniture and cars according to demand for anyone who wants them. So again, the choice is the individual's. No one need go without furniture or cars, and no one need settle for a generic style if they didn't choose to. Yeah, commented Jerry, the workforce might not need to have as large a hand in this as what we originally thought. The people themselves could be far more active in customizing things they have. Then Carol said, there will probably be furniture building clubs, or at least woodworking clubs, and car building clubs as well. So personalization and variety could still exist. But what about makeup and clothing, I asked. Same thing, everyone was saying. Why not? Makeup and beauty product clubs, public facilities where anyone can go and fashion their own clothing or customize their own shade of lipstick. Now we turn to Linda Davies to continue. I didn't get it. So we were all going to have to make our own stuff. Who would have time for that? These people were talking like, oh yeah, this will be great. But I remember thinking, really? How is this great? I don't want to have to make my own car. I don't want to have to make my own clothes. I don't want to have to make my own makeup. How is this a good thing? I don't know anything about making any of these things. And it is not particularly what I want to spend half of my life doing. This system is supposed to give everyone more free time, not more work. I continued by saying that I can get a job, preferably one I like, where I'm earning money and can just go buy the things I want. In cooperativism, I'll be stuck in a workforce doing whatever, and then on top of that, if I happen to want a few things not provided, and I will, then I'll have to spend more of my time working to make them myself. Jordan jumped up and exclaimed, exactly. There was a silence. Strickland's eyebrows raised up high as his eyes looked back and forth, waiting for someone to comment. I was proud of myself. I generally didn't participate much in class. I wasn't particularly shy, I just didn't have much of an interest. But I remember being quite annoyed about how no one was voicing this obvious problem. And now I'd brought the entire class to a standstill. Wow. I admit I had kind of a crush on Jordan at the time. And the fact that he jumped up and voiced his agreement, well, that made it even better. Strickland broke the silence. Well, he said, anybody? There was another pause. Then Jeremy Clark said, well, we don't really know yet how many hours per week or how much of your life you'll be spending in the workforce. I'm thinking we're all guessing, or hoping, it would be considerably less than what is expected now, freeing up a great deal more of your time. You won't be seeing your income gobbled up and paying for all the things you need, like car, gasoline, electricity, rent, mortgage. You wouldn't have to worry about retirement or losing your job or inflation or medical bills or taxes or the ups and downs of the economy. Crime would probably be reduced because most crime is money related. When you think of it that way, comparing the pros and cons, it seems Cooperatism has at least as many advantages to offset the possible inconveniences you have pointed out. Not that your point isn't valid, it's just that we don't know yet that your concerns won't be somehow worked out as we go along. He paused for a moment in thought and then continued. For instance, regarding this club thing, my understanding to this point is that you won't have to make your own car. The workforce will be providing transportation for free, public as well as private. And although we haven't discussed it much, I'm thinking it would provide an array of different styles for different uses. For example, you could get a pickup truck if you were involved with something that required a vehicle like that. Or you could get a van if you needed one, or some sort of roomy luxury car for a long trip you were taking. Or maybe you'd choose a motorcycle if you were inclined that way. Now, you may not have a huge selection of, say, pickup trucks. They may be limited in terms of style and color, but you would always be able to get one that was in tip-top shape when you got it, because the workforce, I assume, would be maintaining a fleet for personal use. And if you find your needs change, you won't have to worry about resale value or how much you'll get if you trade it in. You just return it to the workforce, who services it for the next user, and you drive off with whatever you need next, if anything. I say if anything because I sort of envision public transportation fulfilling most transportation needs. Maybe. I don't know. We haven't gotten that far yet. But that's kind of how I'm starting to see this. No one said anything, so he continued to expand on this. Now, if you want something stylish or unique, resources would be available for you to modify something to your liking. Maybe someone you know enjoys that kind of thing, like a boyfriend or your dad, or someone would help you. Or maybe even build it for you because it's a challenge and fun for them, and they love doing those kinds of projects. There seems to be all kinds of alternative possibilities. Then Tracy says, and as far as making your own clothing or makeup goes, how do you know this would be a chore? I don't see it as a whole lot different from going shopping for hours in the mall. Instead of shopping, you'd be going to a makeup or clothing center and experimenting with all kinds of shades and styles. I would think it would be at least as enjoyable as shopping in the mall. And in the new system, you're not limited by how much you have to spend. You are only limited by your imagination. You can indulge as much or as little as you want. She continued, and I don't think it would be as tedious or difficult as it may initially appear to make these things yourself. The workforce could maintain the basic supplies in these centers and help organize them with advice and suggestions from the users into efficient, user-friendly facilities, complete with instructions on how to produce all the different styles and variations you could think of, with displayed examples and databases full of easily indexed patterns and designs that everyone could access and everyone could contribute to, increasing the possibilities for everyone. She then had an additional thought. Maybe I'm getting ahead of the game here, but I see people willingly contributing to these databases as long as they get the credit for the design. In a money system, people want to cash in on their ideas, waiting for a financial opportunity. Not so in cooperatism. There are no financial rewards. No one would need them. Everyone's needs would be taken care of, so they would be doing it for the recognition. Those of you who balk at this, take a look at the internet today. People are sharing all kinds of things worldwide for free, even in our money-based system. All the know-how and designs for anything you want to build would be available and constantly being improved and updated. This stuff would all be accessible from your home, online, for free. Then, when you're ready, you just go to the facility with your plans and put it together. Carol then said, I think this might be way more fun and have far more advantages. It wouldn't take long if this were the norm for people to get proficient at this process. The variety, creativity, and choice would be amazing. Milt then turned to me and said, "It seems to me that you're looking at this from the perspective of how these things would or would not fit into your life now, in this system, under your present circumstances, instead of imagining yourself in the circumstances and lifestyle of the new system. Once you do that, many of your former objections and concerns might disappear. If you imagine yourself having to make all of these things in addition to living the life you're living in the present system, then yes, it may seem overwhelming and not very practical or efficient. But if you try to picture yourself in this new system, far less constrained with money issues and concerns, more abundant in free time, then this new format seems, at least to me, not so daunting." He continued, "Again, we haven't hashed out enough of the details to resolve some of these issues, but I, for one, think it would be worth doing. Just my opinion." Once again there was silence. Once again Strickland's eyebrows rose. Milt made a good point. I could see what he meant about judging an aspect of the new system as if it had suddenly become part of our lives in the present system, instead of seeing it from the perspective and context of being in the new system. It was difficult not to. The new system hadn't been worked out in our minds yet. We might see things differently from that perspective.